Note that this is the mechanism by which the honourable member will make his inaugural address to the chamber. Therefore, all the usual courtesies and conventions of the House apply. I give the call to the Honourable Philip Scott. Honourable member, if you just would give me one moment so that I can address the visitors in the gallery. You are welcome to the Legislative Council. However, we do require that you remain silent at all times in order to allow the honourable member to make his speech and to remain seated at all times. The Honourable Philip Scott.
Thank you, President. May I offer belated congratulations on your re-election and thank you for the manner in which you execute your role. I believe this contributes to the good atmosphere in this chamber and encourages the traditional cross-party cooperation which has been a hallmark of this House over many years. We're all here because we want a better future for Western Australia. We just differ on how to achieve that. I should also thank the parliamentary staff who have been amazing in helping all the new members of this House and continue to do so. I begin by acknowledging the Lord Jesus Christ, the King of the nations, and give thanks for the grace that has been extended to me. Most of my beautiful family will be here tonight in the President's Gallery. My beloved Aloha, who's kept me humble and on track for 25 years. I had no idea that one day I would meet an amazing Polynesian lady on the other side of the world. We both share and value the benefit of our respective cultures. I wish to acknowledge and partially embarrass all my children in age order: Joel, Danielle, Ryan, Alan, Talia, Naomi, Hazel, Kaylin and Thea. Australia would benefit from militant fecundity. I've always done my best for all of you. And if I was absent working or not present, please know that I always love you from the bottom of my heart and always will. May God bless you and keep you all the days of your lives. It would be remiss of me not to mention my grandchildren too, Matthew, Jeremy, and our latest addition, Jugvir, who is present here tonight. My love extends equally. Before continuing, I do hope that my enunciation is clear for the members of this House. If you require subtitles, I think the Hansard recording will have them. Please do remember that I'm an Australian trapped in an English body. Unlike the movie The King's Speech, I've not been putting marbles in my mouth, so you will have a mixture of the Northern and Southern Hemisphere. When I studied, a professor told us that the average attention span was 20 minutes, and he would break from his lecture accordingly and tell an anecdote or dad joke. It seemed to work, so I might do that tonight, but catch any of you dozing off or on your phones. I am incredibly humbled and honoured to be elected to this House, and I pledge to serve the people of Western Australia. I do that as a public servant. Political allegiances are important, but I would prefer to be a friend to the people before a party. There is not enough of that at state and federal levels. I wish to put on record my thanks to the Honourable Rod Caddies for trusting me to run alongside him. Rod and I both know we would not be in this Parliament had it not been for the sacrifices that One Nation Pauline Hanson has made over many years. Former Prime Minister John Howard said she would be a temporary political phenomenon, like a meteorite flashing across the sky. How wrong he was. Rod will have my support for 4 years, and we will remain loyal to the party brand. Voters rightly expect that. Thanks also to Ryan Smith and Mark Edmonds, who encouraged me to join One Nation in 2016. Sadly, Mark recently passed away overseas after a protracted battle with prostate cancer. But I had the opportunity to thank him and advise him that he would not be forgotten on this occasion. My life began in 1961 in a double-storey house in Newcastle under Lyme, North Staffordshire. A midwife was present for the home birth, and I made a rather awkward entrance with a cord wrapped around my neck, and she was at hand to assist and restore colour to me. Thankfully, my mother Hazel had followed her instincts and had declined the new morning sickness pill, thalidomide, when carrying me. Things could have been very different. That drug caused untold misery for thousands who were born without fully formed arms and legs, and whose suffering was not recognised for decades. A local MP, Jack Ashley, from the old school Labour Party, campaigned tirelessly for them over many decades. Eventually, compensation was given, and Australia followed later. We need politicians like that who will serve the people and take the road less travelled. I had two older siblings, my brother Peter and my sister Rosemary, the eldest of the three. Rosemary is the sole surviving member of my immediate family, and she'll be watching from the United Kingdom. She's always looked after her little brother and continues to watch out for me. I love you, sister, and I wish you better health. I'll see you soon. Sadly, my older brother Peter passed away far too early. He had a very kind heart and would have made a great Australian with his larrikin spirit. To his wife, Caroline, I thank you for being a wonderful wife to him. My own father escaped many of the horrors of the Second World War, as he was deemed to be an essential worker kept at home. He worked at the Swinnerton Ordnance Factory, and maybe exposure to those chemicals led to him developing Parkinson's later in life. I'm not sure. My mother was the bedrock of our family. As a young lady, she endured great personal tragedy during the war, running to the air raid shelters in Birmingham, caring for her mother who was dying of cancer, losing her brother Tom in a bombing raid on the BBC in London, and then towards the end of the war, losing her fiancé in the Battle of Arnhem, all in the space of 5 years. Given these experiences, it's understandable that when I was a young child, she would refrain from watching war movies, and the terrible sound of air raid sirens would bring back painful memories. She developed steely determination, and this, along with her faith, helped her later in life when my father was made redundant from the General Electric Company and seemed to sink into depression. Depression wasn't talked about then. My father was born in the Victorian era and was probably taught to suppress emotions. He was a kind gentleman who would remind me that manners do not cost anything. My hometown was in the outskirts of Stoke-on-Trent, or the Potteries as it is known. The six towns were known for their fine china and ceramics, Wedgwood, Royal Dalton, and even Twyford's toilets. The biggest bog makers in the world, as Steptoe famously said. Coal was also a large employer. In my hometown, there is an area called Silverdale, the colliery area, where the sixth Australian Prime Minister was born. Joseph Cook took office in 1913 with a majority of one seat in the House of Representatives. Always remember that one can make a difference, so never discount yourself. As has been said, if you think you're too small to make a difference, try spending the night in a closed room with a mosquito. Growing up, I was reserved and quiet, but always willing to learn. I was fortunate enough to obtain a place at the Direct Grant High School, which was similar to a grammar school, and my education was free, save for the price of a hymn book, $2, to the age of 18. I believe education should be free for all to the age of 18. Sadly, politics ruined it, and my old school became fee-paying shortly after I left. Had times been different, I would not have received that valuable education. It was a rugby union school where the playing of football, or soccer as you know it here, was forbidden. Against expectations from teachers, I did not excel at rugby like my older brother, so I was relegated to the less favoured sport of hockey, which was also regarded as a gentleman's game. I did well at that, as I was daft enough to volunteer to be the goalkeeper without any padding. The school couldn't afford it. Our school would not have passed the health and safety regulations of today, but thankfully we had discipline. I recall doing cross-country runs in winter on local pavements, recently gritted by the council and surrounded by snow. After that, there was no guarantee of a warm shower afterwards. You either got hot or cold or whatever came. Like most teenagers, I would have the odd disagreement with my father and mother. On one day, or many days, my father would urge me, "Wear a scarf, Philip, wrap up warm, or you'll catch a cold." I would usually reply, "Well, scientifically, that's not quite the case." And he would respond with, "You've always got an answer. You should be a politician." I didn't, and I don't have all the answers, but hopefully I will always ask the right questions. Growing up as a Palm, I chose to support the lesser of the two local football teams, Port Vale instead of Stoke City, as I liked supporting the underdog, and they had a quaint name which no one could find on the map. It's the Aussie way to support the battler and the underdog. So I recently wrestled with the idea of leaving the Dockers for the Eagles, but my conscience wouldn't allow it. I don't believe climate change has caused the Eagles' decline, but it seems responsible for everything else. At university, I struggled with the big issues of life and lost interest in my law degree. One day, my friend Paul Raven suggested I might want to run for the Student Guild, as it is called here. He reminded me that left-wing loonies, often from privileged backgrounds, had taken over the joint whilst we were all studying. Nothing has changed much, has it? I ran as an independent. I can still recall my first public speaking where my heart pounded against the chest. I was fortunate enough to succeed. Later, I ran unsuccessfully for the position of president, losing narrowly in a cross-campus ballot of 2,500 students. As has been said, attention to detail in life is very important, and it may have cost me the 50 votes I fell short by. I'd made friends with members of the Iraqi Society over the pinball machine in the Student Guild, and I'd forgotten to tell them to mark the boxes with numbers instead of ticks. I returned to insurance underwriting after studies, and in the late 80s, I emigrated to Australia with my first wife, Jennifer. Never did I think I would live in Australia, but I would dream about it. As a very young child, I remember reading an encyclopedia that explained Aboriginals were counted as flora and fauna and had no voting rights. I asked my mother to please explain, and try as she may, she could not clarify it to my satisfaction. Most Poms envy the sunny weather and the laid-back attitude of Australia and the spectacular coastline and wildlife. My Uncle Jack from Brisbane, who served in Burma, had visited in the mid-70s and plonked a can of beer alongside me as I was trying to do my Latin homework. As a 15-year-old, this somewhat amused me. Soon after arriving in Australia, it became apparent to me that this country has an identity problem. We were told that the problem was historical links to the United Kingdom and links should be cut. Ironic, given that a fictitious Queen of Australia had been introduced under the Hawke government. I understand the desire to cut loose, but you don't need to throw the baby out with the bathwater. What I found irritating was the denial of the closer links to the United States and the Nations, which was having a far greater influence shaping the destiny of Australia. Former Prime Minister Paul Keating even ridiculed the flag on an overseas trip, which I thought was shameful and disrespectful to those who had died under that flag. In the mid-1990s, the remainder of the Commonwealth Bank was sold off, and the government was losing control to the banking fraternity. And how we need a people's bank now through the Australia Post outlets. But it looks like that's being quashed. Patriotism is not the last refuge of the scoundrel. Political correctness is. Karl Marx said that a people disconnected from their heritage are easily persuaded. And we've seen the long march of Marxism through the institutions. It's interesting that Marx had a deep interest in the devil, that the symbols of the Fabian Society are a wolf in sheep's clothing. The battle between good and evil is real, and we're witnessing it being played out across the world. Australia is notionally a Christian country, and it still has values that are based on the Christian foundations. The most important ones of these are personal freedoms of expression, speech, and religion. Migrants come here because they are free to express themselves and their values. And they are rightfully shocked when they see our governments giving away our freedoms bit by bit. Our foundations are shaky at the moment, and we need to strengthen that which remains. We expect government to provide us with conditions of peace and conditions in which we may prosper, the very basics, but we observe the undermining of what underpins a healthy society, the family unit. Workers' conditions of a fair day's pay are devalued through mass immigration, which only serves the government and more so the mega corporations. An Uber driver recently said to me, "I came here expecting better conditions, but I'm working like a slave." Everyone suffers as infrastructure and services simply cannot cope, and housing becomes unaffordable. As John F. Kennedy said, how we treat the vulnerable reflects on us as a society. But we need to be wise in our kindness, not wasteful. We can't continue to help the disadvantaged if we become a basket case as a nation. That means having a fair but tough immigration policy. If the current federal government can vet speakers from overseas so closely, then they can implement the same national interest for those migrating into this country. Ethical capitalism based on Christian values is the way to go. My own country of birth had William Wilberforce and Lord Shaftesbury, who instituted great social reforms. Enforced socialism makes the state the universal provider and disincentivises work ethic and entrepreneurship, which will destroy us. We need to be a united country without the elites causing divisions between Indigenous and non-Indigenous, black against white, Christian against Muslim. Chaos and division will enable tyrannical government and further erosion of civil liberties. A house divided cannot stand, and it breaks my heart to see what is happening in my homeland, where the sacrifices of those who laid down their lives seem to be forgotten. We cannot afford to make the same mistake here. When you come to Australia, you leave your hostilities aside. Sure, you can remember where you came from, but don't let your ancient grievances spill over at sports grounds or music concerts or on the streets. Don't pick on individuals. We are all Australians now. It's a new start. We need to be Australian, not British, not American, not Chinese, just Australian. And we can lead the world. Instead of being the nation at the bottom of the world, as Paul Keating said, we can turn the world upside down by our example. We need government that provides good health, education and housing in line with our incredible wealth. If dictators in the Middle East can provide good health and education, if Scandinavian countries can have sovereign funds, then what have our governments been doing for the last 50 years? Signing international treaties like the Lima Agreement without the consent of the people, selling off our precious assets to overseas corporations with little benefit for the population here. And it continues. Australia should be very wary of being drawn into overseas conflicts, especially those that are of no concern to us. Sure, remember our allies, but don't go on pointless regime-changing missions. Think Afghanistan and Iraq. Shedding the blood of the host nation and their own young people. We need an Australian Defence Force for the purpose of defending Australia at home. The lucky country needs to become wise, not smart, because we know that smart cities are part of the United Nations agendas, which we are sleepwalking into. You'll be confined to your neighbourhood and not permitted to travel more than 15 minutes from your home without a permit. They tried it in Oxford in the UK, the people rose up and they backed off. Surveillance cameras will monitor your compliance, as well as saving the planet by not travelling far. Your carbon footprint will be monitored on your bank statement, and cash and the freedom it bestows will be replaced by digital currency. Smart freeways, smart meters, facial recognition cameras, as increasing poverty leads to more crime with poor law enforcement. This will enable the powerful to corral the population like battery hens working in a limited area. This is not make-believe. It's mapped out in black and white in the United Nations agendas, and it's the plan for global governance. Government wastes billions on grand schemes. The hundreds of millions spent on the Voice referendum could have instead alleviated Indigenous poverty and displacement, introducing meaningful programs from school into work. But the bureaucracy and opportunistic politicians feed off the guilt narrative with no end point in sight. Telling someone they are a perpetual victim does them no favours. The pandemic highlighted how vulnerable we are. Limited fuel supplies for defence forces, food supplies limited, poor infrastructure, crazy stuff that should have been fixed years ago. But the idea was always to make Australia a supply nation, dependent on outside forces and prevent any notion of national sovereignty. Farmers are being forced off their land as we speak. Pay it off. selling their land for renewables. Trees, which we value as tree canopy, removed the solar panels and wind farms. Ask the 95% of locals in Kalbarri who do not want them. More expensive power, less reliable power, and the money going overseas yet again. The size of government is increasing day by day, as are the burdensome regulations on the everyday Australian. And of course, the more people you can employ in government, the more self-serving the monster becomes. The real wealth creators, the small business, are constantly squeezed by red and green tape and taxes. I was encouraged by the Honourable Dr. Brian Walker's remarks yesterday regarding a flat rate tax across the board, simplifying the tax system. And of course, this was one nation policy 25 years ago. We're on the road to totalitarianism. Where the people fear the government, you have tyranny. Where the government fear the people, you have liberty. I humbly acknowledge that my election to this place was in part courtesy of preference flows from the voters concerned about the firearms legislation passed in the prior term of Parliament. These same voters have inundated my office with emails and calls ever since I was sworn in, and I appreciate their concerns and perspectives greatly. Some are not even gun owners, but have witnessed the practical problems with legislation that was rushed and poorly implemented, and thus on principle hold the same concerns of many registered gun owners. I'm not a firearm owner, but I believe the right to responsibly own and use firearms to be essential in a free society that is governed by the rule of law. Firearms have a practical application in Western Australia, given our farming industry requires them for the humane euthanasia of livestock and pest control. This Labor government should hang its head in shame for making our salt-of-the-earth farmers feel like criminals. The farmer, and indeed the firearm owner, have always had a friend in One Nation, and the Honourable Rod Caddies and myself voted in favour of the disallowance motion earlier today. But it should be of no surprise to anyone that voters concerned about the Firearms Act would preference One Nation ahead of, say, the Liberals. Given the third reading vote on the Firearms Bill, the Hansard record shows that last year, out of the 7 Liberal MLCs, 4 voted in favour, with only 1 voting against it. I'm also concerned about the traditions and conventions handed down to us from the Westminster system. When people express misgivings about Australia having an overseas head of state, they are missing the point. I'm no longer a monarchist, but I believe in the principles that have served us in the past. The common law, the separation of powers, but somehow these have become a distant memory as we see the innocent without remedy. Retrospective legislation, promotions and positions filled by those favourable to the government of the day rather than on merit and impartiality. There is a sound argument to allow the people of Western Australia to vote for their own governor and to have citizens' referenda on major issues like Switzerland. This would prevent the conflicts of interest I'm alluding to and enable the voice of the people to be heard more effectively. The implied freedoms, the right to protest peacefully, should be upheld by the judiciary and not circumvented by local government regulations or at the whim of the police commissioner or his officers. Justice should be evenly dispensed without fear or favour. As we know, there are different tiers of justice dependent on access to the best lawyers. The law courts are open to all, like the most expensive hotels. Weaponised lawfare needs to stop. At a federal level, Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act should have been repealed. We cannot continue on a road where freedom of expression is restricted unnecessarily. The existing laws are sufficient. Adding layer upon layer risks civil unrest, as we've witnessed overseas. The police need to be reminded they are servants of the Crown, that is the people first and foremost. Unfortunately, our heritage is not taught sufficiently at schools. We cannot, and within the police force, we cannot have Stasi-style policing as we witnessed during the pandemic. Apathy is our greatest enemy. The government can keep us with our noses to the grindstone as we struggle to pay bills. Bread and circuses and racetracks will ensure that we remain frogs in water that is getting hotter by the day. The mainstream media have been part of the problem. News is often reported with side comments by presenters, and any semblance of impartiality has disappeared. The ABC, the Australia Bashing Corporation, no longer provides a service that should be funded by taxpayers. I'm so glad that we now have independent media operators who served us admirably during the lockdowns. But for how long will they be allowed to operate? We've seen how E-Commissioner Julie Inman-Grant has thankfully lost 3 cases, but her remit seems to be to censor rather than to protect. And her own historical links to overseas interests are alarming. The law that is now going through, that we identify ourselves online, is on the face of it about protecting the children, but really is part of a Trojan horse to shut down debate and dissent. CCP-style policing and rewards or punishment through a social credit system. It's coming unless we act now. We are walking into a digital prison and being shackled like the first convicts. Legitimate attempts to protect children have been sidelined. For example, I'm staggered by the opposition to the Keeping Children Safe campaign in Albany, as I would have expected all sections of the community would want that. It's even more alarming that a hard-working doctor, Thomas Brath, is being chased out of town and disowned by AFRA. I guess speaking the truth in evil times is a crime. And when you're over the target, you get some flack. Comments made by a couple of members of the 41st Parliament were reprehensible. I know members of the gay community, and they want children protected as much as anyone. The issue of protecting children is very much at the forefront. Lee Hansen has recently highlighted how narratives are being promulgated to our youngest and most vulnerable in Tasmania, with children being encouraged not to discuss the issues with their parents. We still don't seem to recognise the harm inflicted by puberty blockers and the fact that they have been banned overseas. Those children will have recourse for legal damages in the future, but the physical damage will have been done. And whilst we are programming our children, let's make it easier for parents to put them under state control from an early age, and let's lower the voting age to 16. We've taught our young to be ashamed of our past instead of cherishing the good parts. We're not a country with a perfect history, but if you look to countries to our north, you will see nations that have caste systems. You will see nations that neglect the poor because they believed They have been reborn and they did some wrong in a previous life. You have systems where one religion is favoured over another. We have countries where homosexuals are whipped. Migrants come here because we have good values, and we need to protect them and not be ashamed of what this country has to offer. Will the bicentenary celebrations unite us as one state, or have us looking inwards and backwards again? We need to resist the notion that social justice only belongs to one category of people. It is universal. Our history includes the poor being imprisoned, subhuman prison conditions, orphans shipped out from England, child abuse by priests, and so on. Nice words and projects are a poor substitute for real action that meets the point of need. I'm reminded often of quotes from Orwell's novel Animal Farm. 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. That is how Marxism works, pitting one group against another by maintaining a victimhood instead of helping the person get a leg up. All people and races are equal. We all bleed the same blood. I share Martin Luther King's vision that people should not be judged by the colour of the skin, but by the content of their character. We do not want to see masked protesters on our streets from the left or the right. That is the Australian, that's simply not the Australian way. We believe in the right of freedom to protest, but within the bounds of the law. My belief that our heritage and freedoms needed to be protected led to my first steps in Australian politics. A Sri Lankan pastor, Dr. Daniel Nalaya, had been taken to court in Victoria under recently introduced anti-vilification laws. It was a test case instigated by activists who deliberately visited his church. He stood his ground and eventually won in the Supreme Court of Victoria, who rightly ruled that robust debate is allowed. After this, the Rise Up Australia Party was formed, consisting of many migrants who wanted to keep Australia Australian. They understood too well, having fled from their own countries. In Western Australia, the party was led by Jane Foreman, who I'm delighted to say is here tonight. And in 2013, I ran for the seat of Fremantle. In 2016, I had greater success in the seat of Brand with just 3 volunteers. So in 2016, it made sense for me to join One Nation, and with encouragement, I joined in time for the state election in March 2017. I've always respected Pauline Hanson as someone who puts Australian interests first, and she was fighting the good fight even after being falsely imprisoned by the establishment. Ron and Mary McLean had kept the One Nation vision alive during those wilderness years, and with the assistance of the Honourable Rod Caddies and Ryan Smith, sufficient numbers were obtained to re-register the party. We owe them a great debt of gratitude, and I wish them well in their twilight years. Colin Ticknell led the party to a commendable result in the short space of time we had. In South Metro, I missed out on preferences to Aaron Stonehouse of the Liberal Democrats. However, I was impressed by his beliefs in personal freedom and smaller government. There was a real buzz of excitement at that time. I had some really good, loyal and people who helped me. I can't forget them. Patricia Phelan is here tonight, and I dearly miss her beloved husband, Richard Beveridge, who always had a warm smile and a beer ready. Richard Eldridge ran with me in the same area and gave help over and beyond. Jack and Jules Bainbridge became good friends and still are. Terry Hall always listened and gave good advice. The Davis family started a legacy of practical help that lasted throughout the years, and we had so many other foot soldiers: Marlene, Wayne, Julie, Stuart, Scott, Ben, Gordon, Naomi, Danny, Fiona, Suki, Craig, Lisa, Aggie, Taylor, Catherine, Narelle, and the Arsenal supporter Steve Sleep. We started to drain the Billabong, and we continue to do so. At the post-election party on the evening, volunteers gathered at the Melville Bowling Club. As you would expect, the ABC reporter was kept outside, much like lepers who used to appear in the churches in previous centuries. I had inadvertently misled a certain irascible Scotsman who currently works for one of the crossbenchers to attend the event without giving him the exact details. He turned out to be a great blessing, as he bought a couple of amber liquids for me, just breaking the stereotype of Scotsman. At the same time, he was trying to make himself look invisible. After the election, a mini-executive was formed consisting of Doug Shaw as president, Jenny Bennett, Richard Eldridge and Shung Chang. If it had not been for Shung Chang keeping me interested, I might well have walked away. Things changed, and after the Darling Range by-election, Paul Farling, a very experienced politician, became president, and Shung paved the way for me to become South Metro Chair. My old friend Sheila Mundy, with her affable husband Jerry, became North Metro Chairs. Things were looking up. At the state election 2021, with One Nation being led by the Honourable Rod Caddies, as we suspected, the incumbent government had smashed all operation. We had volunteers like Alan, who made 3,000 call flutes and distributed them with Dale, Tammy and Paul. It was so frustrating, but the climate of fear and a perceived benevolent state daddy had worked a treat. Alan went on to win the coveted Red Wig Award, and to the best of my knowledge, he still has it in his possession, but rarely wears it except as a sporran. The Honourable Rod Caddies was exhausted from them all, quite understandably, and Paul Farling returned. Other members on the new executive included Tyler Walsh, Travis Carter, Shung Chang, Sheila Mundy and Paul Howard. We were a tight team and helped one another out through difficult times. Travis kindly helped me with a car after I lost my employment because of the mandates. I have to say that the majority of right-thinking Australians are weakened by internal divisions, sometimes real, sometimes by design, by malevolent forces. For instance, if the Liberals had shown some conviction and principle, they would have preferenced long-standing member Cam Tinley over the Honourable Brad Pettit at the 2021 state election. If the Liberals had not sat on the fence at the 2022 federal election, Paul Farling would have been elected over Senator Fatima Payman. The left are much better at joining forces and looking after their own. There are too many attempts to censor debate by labelling those who have a different perspective. Without freedom of speech, we become nothing more than slaves of the approved narrative. Science that cannot be questioned is not science but mere dogma. Control by climate change agenda is the new normal. The Catholic Church did the same centuries ago when those who disagreed were labelled as heretics and sometimes burnt at the stake. Everyone believes in something or is under the influence of something. The Greens have their environmental religion. They can justify whatever actions they take based on the belief they are saving the planet. It was the Ice Age when I was growing up, then it was the hole in the ozone layer. There's no hope of social justice if you make the poor poorer here or overseas. Net zero needs to be abandoned, period. So now I must address the elephant in the room that has been waiting patiently and that no one in authority wants to talk about. In fact, many in the community have what is known as COVID amnesia. The COVID lockdowns here and interstate revealed so much about how Australia has regressed as a society. Long-held freedoms were suspended, and especially the choices we make for our own health and well-being. We were told there was only one solution, and we had to comply or suffer the consequences. We're still those who opted not to take the experimental medicine, Mark McGowan's words, not mine, were denigrated. We had medical apartheid. Choice words were used to denigrate those who objected, and this was reinforced by the mainstream media. Emergency workers, some with decades of experience in the health, fire brigade and police, were just consigned to the scrap heap, and even now the vindictive punishments still continue. No shame, just a doubling down. Never talk to me about one nation being divisive. This was real division. I recall speaking to lawyer John Hammond on the radio about immunity being granted to pharmaceutical companies. He agreed it wasn't a good look. A two-tier society in Australia. Who would have thought? Doctors and nurses frightened to speak out lest they lose their livelihood and profession. Senior bureaucrats, some with no medical expertise, choosing to make draconian decisions out of self-interest and preservation. Jobs for the boys and rewards for those who complied. Doing your own research or reading somehow made you a conspiracy theorist. The statistical evidence was there at the outset. Dr. Tess Lowry, who worked previously for the World Health Organization and who was from evidence-based medicine at Bath University, called for the rollout to be halted at an early stage as the adverse effects were becoming apparent. Even now, the findings of Professor Angus Dalgleish, oncologist at St George's London, and world-leading cardiologist Dr. Asim Malhotra are not being heeded. Money talks, doesn't it? Athletes collapsing in record numbers. An atmosphere of denial. The state had become God to so many people. Simple Simon said jump, and people asked how high. Shameful pressure put on school leavers to comply or be labelled as criminals. Police had to prosecute the narrative. A lady I know was visited 3 times for distributing information about the experiment, despite the fact it came from referred and credible sources. A senior walking his dog past Langley Park found himself caught up in the protests, was asked for his ID, became confused and found himself in the East Perth lockup. It wasn't policing without fear or favour. Sometimes it was intimidation. Conscientious objectors had no recourse. Unions showed their true colours. The Fair Work Commission did not want to know. And if you worked for workers' compensation or a government body and spoke out, you were shown the door. And they talk about trust in government. Neighbour turned on neighbour in this new Orwellian world. Snitching was on. An African church near me had an authorised meeting of 10 people to broadcast on Zoom. It didn't stop the local gossips on social media. I pointed out their information and the irony that the pastor was a medically qualified person. Brothels remained open, but churches did not. And sadly, the churches were for the most part silent. Access was allowed to your mates to cross the border, but you weren't allowed to see your loved ones pass away. Families divided on medical choices. The state was making the decisions for us, just like the no jab, no pay policy of our previous federal government. I fully understand why people took the medicine, and some of my own family did. They needed to work, to provide for their families, or they just did not understand. I don't condemn them at all. We need to recognise now that letting the state govern us harder wasn't the answer. It was not an unmitigated success. Sweden had the same results by isolating the vulnerable and the elderly. They avoided the disruption to business, and they had the same results. We now have people who have medical conditions they did not have before. And in last year's Australian Medical Journal, Professor Tyndall admitted that they cannot rule out that long COVID is unrelated to the vaccines themselves. The information is there, but the so-called investigative journalists are nowhere to be seen. We were told the vaccine was safe for children under 18, but now we are told by Otegi it is not recommended. We need another sorry day, perhaps a new public holiday to acknowledge the many who have been affected in so many different ways. Those in authority who push the narrative hard need to look in the mirror. Do yourselves a favour and resign. I forgive you, but I won't, and I can't forget. I will always be grateful for and mindful of the many people who helped me on the journey to this house. I've received so many kind messages, and they are part of my story, and I owe it to them to speak the truth. I know they have my back in the past and will continue to do so. I owe it to them to do my best and keep the flame of Australian freedom glowing. The passionate candidates we had at the state election knew they had little success of succeeding in the Assembly, but they were prepared to make sacrifices for the greater good. They believed in Australia that needed to be protected and preserved for future generations, in contrast to the global governance that awaits us. They were not your average candidates or political apparatchiks. They had fire in their belly and convictions that what they were doing was the right thing. I must mention Parminder Singh and his amazing family who gave so much, and I thank the Sikh community for their support. He was desperately unlucky not to be elected. I also acknowledge Dr. Mandy Darley in Oakford, who showed a similar level of commitment. Kate White couldn't contain herself to the bush and was everywhere. Anne McSkimming lent me a car when mine broke down. Richard Graham promoted me so ably on TikTok, and much to my children's surprise, who thought they were in their own safe space. Con Orthiel kept us on message and on track. Tim the Core Flute Man Smith, hostess with the mostess Chrissy in Rockingham, Dr. Peter Lyons, Wayne Fuller, Nick Gemmell, the true believers down in Mandurah. Brad Dickinson, who put his hand up despite health issues. Igor Marinenko, who proved that he could adapt quickly from sailing in the Antarctica to standing in Jandakot. John Burton, Liam Hall, Elizabeth Eradi, Andrew Produski. There's so many, and if I've left you out, you are not forgotten. You all stood up when it mattered. So advance Australia where? We need to return to our core values and protect them. The Commonwealth of Australia needs to be restored where no one gets left behind or trodden underfoot. True law needs to replace the legal system where the innocent, even when vindicated, are left out of pocket. Life needs to be cherished over death. An individual is a valuable living being made in the image of the Creator. The aged need dignity in their twilight years. We need strong families and communities. Change starts from the bottom up when the people realise they have the power and that government is there to serve them, not the other way around. It will require courage and consistency, reminding our leaders that we are not corporate chattels and that they neglect everyday Australians at their peril. The alternative is unthinkable. It is to remain silent, in doing so harm ourselves and future generations. I'm reminded of this quote from the Russian dissident Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Gulag Archipelago. We didn't love freedom enough. And even more, we had no awareness of the real situation. We purely and simply deserved everything that happened afterwards. My friends in this House, we are standing to protect the heart and soul of Australia. We need to take back control and truly walk together as one nation. Thank you.
Can you just drink the
Visitors in the public gallery, if you could move towards the exit as quickly and as quietly as possible while the Legislative Council resumes its work. Members, could you please take your seats? The Honourable Lauren Cahoon.